Anything new? Anything exciting? Alright, so we have our exam Monday, in which case we will take at home. It'll open up at 8 a.m. on Monday on Blackboard. We'll have our exam review.
Does that mean we don't have class Monday? Or
We do not have class. Yeah, no class Monday. And I'll send a announcement on Blackboard just to reiterate. So Friday, we will have exam review. We'll go over what's to be expected on the exam. And so yes, Monday, no class. We'll have our exam at home. Unless someone would like that. We'll have a show of hands of people who prefer to have it in class. We got one. So we'll just do like to have it in class. No. So yes, we'll have it at home. So no class Monday. All right, moving along. So we looked at reasons why we sleep disorders. We can take a look at narcolepsy. I need this flip this up. We covering insomnia? Narcolepsy? Okay. All right, well, we'll cover that before we get into drugs. All right, so sleep deprivation. All right, so we have some major sleep disorders, things that impair our ability to have consistent sleep through our circadian rhythm. Some of them include insomnia. Right? Insomnia can be classified under several different sort of reasons why you wouldn't properly get sleep. One would be is that you just don't get consistent sleep all the way through in one straight sort of process, right? You're constantly being awakened by some reason, some stimulation of some sort, or maybe neurotic thoughts, right? The ability to shut the brain off in some way, to sort of suppress or depress some of your hormones in order to create the ability to relax, calm yourself down, issues within the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. Right? One brings you up, the other brings you down. Some imbalance of the sorts in terms of chemicals, right? So chemical imbalance. We would think of things dealing with like melatonin, which helps us sleep, which regulates mood. There may be some sort of imbalance with that as well too. Or it could simply be that you just have poor sleep habits and the patterns and methodologies that you use to go to sleep. Right? You're up late looking at Facebook and YouTube and things like that before you go to sleep. Those sort of behaviors lead to images crossing into your mind that won't allow your brain to relax. Right? Or maybe it's keeping certain lighting on in the house, eating before you go to sleep, something of this sort. Right? Then we have narcolepsy. Has anyone ever had experience with seeing someone with narcolepsy? Who knows what narcolepsy is? Yeah.
It's, isn't it normally caused by an overexcitement of, or overstimulation that causes people to suddenly spontaneously fall asleep?
Yeah. Relatively still unknown why, because it's misfiring within the neurons in some way. Remember how we showed that the neurons fires from one cell to the next through the synaptic gap. Maybe something is being oversaturated in terms of some chemical messengers and neurotransmitters. Not completely understood, but as Will said, it basically takes you from consciousness, conscious awakeness, skips the 3 stages of sleep, goes directly to the 4th, which is REM, rapid eye movement sleep. So remember we said in REM, you essentially have some disconnect between the brain and your body, right? Which means you kind of lose control of your body. So if you're narcoleptic, you go from being awake, and something triggers it. Maybe it could be overstimulation of laughter, right? You laugh too hard, maybe it's a sound. You know, you could think of lepsy, right? Leptic, you could think of almost epilepsy, right? In which case something like vivid lights, vivid imagery, something when there that triggers the brain to have too much of a stimulant and causes it to go straight to REM sleep. You lose complete access to the body. You just essentially pass out. We can take a look at a YouTube video. Let's see what narcolepsy looks like really quick. Internet running slow for anyone else? How's your internet? The Wi-Fi working for you?
Which network are you on? You want it, AC roam?
Yeah, that one's having an issue, so I'm on the public, the hanging Alright, we'll have to skip this. It's just going too slow. Alright, so we have narcolepsy. So narcolepsy is essentially going from conscious awakeness directly into REM sleep, which is your fourth stage of sleep, where you lose sort of control of your body and essentially collapse. Right? Now that can happen several times a day for a person who suffers from narcolepsy. I saw one case where a woman does that maybe about 60 times a day. So you figure people are just pouring in and out of sleep. Several different times. So you can think of the dangers of that, which means, hey, you probably will lose the inability to drive because you can kill yourself if you have a narcoleptic attack. You probably want to always be around somebody who you're familiar with because you think if you're out doing something and you completely pass out. All right, then we have sleep apnea. Anyone here suffers from sleep apnea? No. Who here could tell us what sleep apnea is? Yes.
When you stop breathing while you're sleeping.
Yes, you have a loss of breathing during sleep. And this can come in several different ways. Not completely understood why. Some of the physiological reasons can be that as we get older, we do deposit fatty tissues on our throat and the back of our soft palate. That can restrict our breathing during sleep, depending on how we're sort of positioned as we rest. Other parts can be misfiring within the neurons is a source of that. The other thing can also be very dangerous if you're in REM sleep, or we say you lose the ability to connect with your physical body. Oftentimes, you can just stop breathing altogether. And what happens is the blood sorts of build up CO2, since there's a loss of oxygen, builds up CO2 within the bloodstream, and that essentially jolts the person back away to take a breath. Right? And so if this process keeps happening, you'll find somebody to be snoring very heavily, and then they'll stop breathing, and then you'll hear them kind of catch their breath again, unconsciously. Right? Gets worse as you age, as we say, because we usually deposit fatty tissue on our throats and soft palates as we age. So it can become very severe and even fatal. I have a sister who suffers from it, and they monitor her, and they say she loses her ability to breathe maybe like, I don't know, 300 times a night or something like that, right? Who sleeps like that. So very disturbing, very, stress related in some degree. It causes you a lot of stress. All right, then we got sleepwalking and sleep talking. Anyone here sleepwalk? Can you tell us your experience with sleepwalking? Well, I mean, does anybody observers that?
Oh, yeah, no, I get up and I just do things that are completely unrelated to anything else that I'm just, I wake up sometimes just like in the middle of the house, just places, but from what I can tell, everyone else was like, I was caught up one time, I think I might have been in the kitchen doing something, I'm not sure, but I was starting to make my way back up the stairs.
Okay. All right, so getting lost in the house, moving around in the house, right? Doing things that maybe your mind is perceiving that you're doing, even though you're unconscious to some degree. So sleepwalking and sleep talking generally happen during like stage 2 and stage 1. Stage 1 and stage 2 of sleep. Because remember I said in stage 3, you're in deep sleep, right? So usually there's not really a lot of motor functions happening there, right? Stage 1, you have those little tics where you can see people sort of moving around and jumping around. Stage 2 primarily is where sleepwalking, sleep talking occurs. You're not really in deep sleep, but you're processing a lot of imagery, memories, cognitive functions from during the day. Then we got night terrors. Night terrors primarily happen with babies, right? But they can happen with adults as well too. Night terrors are essentially some sort of disconnect between reality and whatever your mind is imagining as you sleep. Right? So you can, with night terrors, you can jolt yourself up, be looking at some familiar face, and still not recognize who you're looking at for some time. So when babies have night terrors, and I wish I could show the video, but the internet's just not working with me today. But babies, essentially, you walk in, and the baby having a night terror, you turn the light on, baby opens his eyes, looks at you, and is just screaming, right, for no reason, and do this for minutes, right? It's still processing its sort of imagery from sleeping, but even with the outside world being presented visually. Which in some cases, there's been people who've killed, maybe their spouse or significant other, and not recognizing what they did that quickly, right? Until they finally become conscious of that. All right, what we dream. 8 out of 10 dreams contain at least one negative event or emotion, right? Some of this includes falling, right, which is very prevalent, very common. People have dreams of falling in some form or fashion, whether it's into a void, a great abyss, falling off a cliff, a mountain, off the edge of a building. Anyone here has the typical falling dream? Tell me about your falling dream. What is it? What does it involve? Are you falling in some black void, abyss, off a building?
I remember having this one dream that reoccurred a few times. It was me and my older brother in our old family car. I don't remember where we were, but like, it was like, oh no, the car is, it was like disaster, of like, we're in the car, how do we save ourselves, we're gonna fall off a cliff. Like, you know, the car's moving on its own. And I remember it like recurring one time, and then finally I had it where we're in the car and it falls off the cliff and we hit the ground. I remember normally it's like, you wake up right before you hit the ground, but we hit the ground and I was still dreaming. I was like, huh.
So when you hit the ground, what are you experiencing?
You like, how do I describe this? I remember it being weird because like the only reference you have is other experiences of like hitting ground, so it felt like, you know, jumping off like a huge jump or whatever. And then you hit the ground, you like phantom feel that impact, and then that was it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I remember being like, huh, that's weird, like for 2 seconds, then I woke up.
Gotcha. Any idea what that's about? You interpret that one? Anyone else? Falling. All right, some people, very common, being attacked, pursued, or rejected. Anyone with experiences of dreams of someone chasing you? No? Okay, very common. Common one is misfortune, right, of any kind, some sort of failure in life, right, and the possibility of something going wrong. Maybe you're taking that in from your conscious life, bringing that in because you have anxiety about something you're not addressing. 1 in 10 men, so 10% of men dream about sex, bless you. 10% of men dream about sex, whereas 1 in 30 women dream about sex. So men have more sexual dreams than women on average. Right? Some more common ones, trauma. So any sort of trauma you experience, maybe it's dealing with a parent or something abusive of some sort. Musicians typically dream about music, right? People who are deficit in some perception or sensation ways, such as blindness, deafness, dream about nonverbal sense use. Then others have a lot of immediate experiences, right? Which are usually watching TV before you fall asleep, looking at social media, things on the internet before you fall asleep. All right, here it's showing us a graph on how we sleep less as we age. All right, so here on the x-axis is birth, all the way to the end, 90 years of age. On the y-axis, we're looking at average daily sleep hours in a 24-hour cycle period. So we can see babies typically sleep almost up to 16 hours, right? And as we gradually age, it gets less. So we can say for 90-year-olds, they're getting less than 6 hours, about 5.5 hours of sleep. Whereas for maybe most of you, let's see here, probably somewhere around here, so you probably should be getting, actually here, 90-year-olds are getting less than 4 hours of sleep, sorry. And whereas you are probably getting about 5.5 hours of sleep. Is the same accurate? 5.5 hours? Who got 8 hours of sleep last night? Wow, that's impressive. Who's operating on less than 5? Okay. All right, why we dream? Well, Freud would say, right, Freud, the grandfather of psychologists, right, would do a lot of dream interpretation, right? We say, hey, in our dreams, we are trying to manifest something, a desire, or fear is trying to manifest itself, right? Something is trying to manifest. That's important from the subconscious. Something that we are highly aware of and our conscious sort of experiences. But whether something we have not fully addressed, right? So Freud would say, hey, you know what? If you have a fear, you're avoiding that fear in some way because the fear is probably too obvious. It could be like a fear of your parents. Maybe a fear of you failing your parents. Maybe your parents want you to finish at Concordia, get a degree, and Freud would say, hey, you know what? Maybe that's not truly what you want to do, right? And so, but you're doing it every day, right? But you're not addressing it. You're not going to be your own self. So what's going to happen? It's going to fall into your dream, right? You're going to have a fear about failure, maybe a fear, dreams about your parents, your mom, your dad, something of the sort related to that, right? So Freud would say, pay attention to your dreams. They usually involve having some sense of desire for something in the subconscious mind, or some sort of fear, right? Some sort of wish fulfillment, something you wish would happen. All right, other reasons. We file and process memory. So if you don't get proper sleep, you could be extremely forgetful, right? So a lot of our automated processes for storing long-term memories happen during sleep. If you're not getting proper sleep, things that are important are not going to long-term memory storage. Thus, you're sort of eliminating a lot of relevant information that you probably should have in your useful life for surviving. All right, we need it for physiological function to develop and preserve neural pathways. Right, so when we looked at those neurons and we looked at neuroplasticity and how we can grow our brain based on what we learn and experience, we would be sort of inhibiting that. Okay, let's move on. All right, that was it for sleeping and dreaming. Now we're getting into tolerance and addiction and substance use. So now we're looking at drugs, right? Let's look at dependency, habituation, right? Tolerance, withdrawal, right? How this all have an effect on us in some way. Right, so picture in your mind still that parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system, right? Sort of the up and down of our experiences, right? And our automated bodily functions. Right, so we say things have to be in balance. And when we throw off the up and downs by coming up too much, right? It creates an effect on us psychologically, right? And maybe we need to be brought down, right? Suppress, depress, in some way. All right, so we can say, hey, variations of drugs' overall effects depend on its biological effects and the user's expectations. What does your mind expect from the drug, right? And variations occur with different social and cultural contexts. We can say, hey, you know what, we don't use certain drugs because culturally it's taboo. Right? Culturally it's illegal. Culturally we don't grow the substance to have it available everywhere. In other places where it's native, right, to the environment, you say, hey, it's more accepted, it's use, it's practice, it could be a little bit more recreational than what we hear. So things are culturally, has cultural context to it, and social, right? I have my drug every morning, really great drugs. So I take my drugs first thing in the morning, and it makes me feel great. It's an upper, it's a stimulant, right? It makes me think better, it makes me feel better, it changes my mood, right? Then I go to a different drug dealer every morning and go get my drug. Today I went to Dunkin' Donuts. Right? Yesterday I went to Starbucks to get my drugs. If I want really crappy drugs, I'll go to 7-Eleven, right? So it really just depends. So my drug of choice is caffeine, right? I'm like, well, caffeine is a stimulant. What is it doing? Stimulating those neurons, stimulating that neural activity, shooting off at a faster rate more of those neural impulses. You're like, hey, why are you thinking quicker and faster? Very simple. You've upped the ante to those neural activity. You stimulated that neural activity, and now you get quicker thoughts, better thoughts, faster thoughts, more pathways, et cetera, et cetera. All right? And you say, well, what would happen if anyone here drinks coffee every day like me? Who here drinks coffee every morning? What happens if you stop drinking coffee? Just like,
Suddenly,
yeah.
I actually practice not drinking every day because I don't want to be dependent on it. And they also, say to avoid the practice of coffee, if you, when you first wake up, wait like an hour, then drink it, because your body starts producing a lot of the natural like wake up stuff. If you drink the coffee right away, it just uses the coffee. So when I'm not on it, yeah, I feel slower, I feel a bit more foggy, but it's like harder.
Yeah, so I mean, we have withdrawal, right? So essentially, what is withdrawal? Well, we just said your body and your mind has an expectation that's gonna receive something, right? Now, it's not receiving it in the time that it expects to receive it. Your body and your mind says, hey, something's off, right? We don't feel good. You gave us some pleasure, right? You're giving us pleasure at a repetitive rate, and now you're not, right? So we'll look at how that sort of responds. Terms to learn: psychoactive drugs, which means drugs that affect the mind and how the mind perceives, feels things, right? Tolerance and then withdrawal. All right, so substance use disorder, right? Which means anything disorder just means abnormal. Right, and we'll talk about that more later on in the semester. Anything disorder just means essentially like the word implies, out of order, right? Things are balanced, things are normal, and everything is something out of order. It also means just abnormal in the sense of averages, right? So we're saying like in a normal sample of a population of people, we took 100 people and the distribution of, say, typical bell curve. These are normal. Right? So you say, hey, disorder is simply when we have normal or average and things that are on the tail end of those normal or averages, right? So we say substance use disorder for the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, is drug use continues despite significant life disruption. So you say disorder, it's like, hey, significant life disruption. What does that mean? It means, hey, it impacts your work, right? The ability to survive and live within the society. It impacts relationships in some meaningful way. You have issues with intimate, romantic relationships, issues with family, issues with coworkers, right? And it impacts yourself. You say, hey, I'm not happy with self. Like, hey, how do you feel about yourself? Crappy. Like, well, that's a problem, right? If other people feel crappy about you, you should at least feel great about yourself. Now you have twofold of the problem. You also feel crappy. In what way do you feel crappy about yourself? A host of ways, right? How you feel, how you look, your motivation, right? Goals, things you want to do, objectives, missions, not being completed, right? Maybe you're just unhappy too about the relationships that suffer from it. All right, but you still continue the drug. Significant. You become homeless, still got the drug, right? Lose everything, still continue doing the drug. when you clearly know that the drug is the root of the problem. Right? You've now become very dependent on the drug to live in a normal life. That normal consists of you having that drug as part of pleasure. Now, who wants the drug? We say, well, remember we have in some way two sort of minds, right? That automatic functioning has now become dependent on that drug, right? So now you kind of disrupted some neurotransmitters, you disrupted some hormones, you disrupted some things to say, this was the normal that we were expecting, now something's different. So you're causing these major shifts physiologically. You've disrupted the brain in the sense of the perception that you absolutely need this to function throughout the day, right? That you would probably most likely experience major anxiety if you did not get the substance. So if human beings gravitate towards pleasure, naturally, it's gravitating to this thing because this is pleasurable. And to not have pleasure will cause you immense anxiety, stress, what have you. Right? So the brain has now established that, hey, life sucks without this, basically. All right, brain changes may persist after quitting, right? The craving. So with me, with my caffeine, you say, hey, there's an addiction here, right? I've been using it since I was 12 years old, right? So if I try to quit, I'm gonna crave, and cravings that are unsatisfied is anxiety, right? You create some sort of discomfort. You need to have it. You don't feel comfortable, you have angst, you're nervous, you're shaking. Can't focus because you have to get the substance. All right, severity varies from mild, moderate to severe. All right. So for any sort of disorder, for what we call the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is the Bible for basically psychologists, psychiatrists, on how to diagnose disorders, you know, things are usually mild, moderate, severe. So any sort of medical sense for any treatment of anything is a mild case of it, something we have a moderate sort of bout, or it's extremely severe. And you have to meet certain criteria in order to fall under each category. All right? So mild can mean basically you use it in a recreational sense, but it doesn't really impact. Maybe impacts one facet of your life. Maybe impacts like, hey, intimate relationships, romantic relationships, right? The substance use. But you say, hey, I still can function. Go to work, I still good with my family, things like that. Right? Severe would be like sort of everything is that you can think of maybe a crack addict, right? A heroin addict, a meth addict, in which case they would maybe possibly sell their child to get the substance, right? Or maybe sell their own body to get the substance. All right, some indicators of substance use disorder. We'd say, hey, diminished control, right? Diminished social functioning, hazardous use, and then drug action. Right? So we can say diminished control means you just no longer have the ability to discipline yourself in some fashion without the substance. Right? Diminished social functioning, you can no longer function in social groups unless you are under the influence. Right? So think of alcohol, think of maybe marijuana, things, you know, funny enough, alcohol and marijuana are both sort of stimulants and depressants, really depending on the mixture of THC, CBD, things like that. In which case it has different effects on different people. It can be a downer, what we call a depressant, in the sense that, hey, you got too many thoughts, you got too much going on in your life, too much anxiety, you drink and it relaxes you. And this stuff goes away. Calms you in the sense of almost feeling drowsy and sleepy, right? Nothing matters. Okay, let's move on. Tolerance, right? So we all have different tolerances based on many things, based on genetics, right? And we say, hey, we may have a predisposition for certain things, right? You may be sensitive to certain things based on what your grandparents did, based on what your parents did. Does that trait, does that gene lie inside of you to where if you were to try a certain chemical compound, that you would have an incessant need or craving to continue having it, right? So with continual use of alcohol and some drugs, not marijuana, users develop tolerance as brain chemistry adapts to offset the drug effect, right? We call it neural adaptation. So you're adopting your brain chemistry to offset the drug effect. Changing brain chemistry, right? Changing brain chemistry according to how it affects the body itself. And so you can see that in the mind, even though there may not be really drastic effects on the body, the mind still perceives that something is off. It needs to compensate for that. So to experience the same effects, users require larger doses, right? So the tolerance say over a period of time, you no longer have the same effect as when you first tried, second time you tried, plus your third time. You now need to keep increasing the dosage of the substance in order to get the same effect, right? And the effect could be a feeling, the effect could be any sort of experience that you have with it. Addiction. So addiction is a little different here. We're saying, all right, caused by ever increasing doses of most psychoactive drugs, including prescription painkiller, right? You're increasing the dose, right? And you're building a tolerance, increasing the dose, building tolerance. You keep moving up the period, right? So where in order to get this effect that you're trying to achieve, your brain's now trying to achieve, you essentially change the effect each time you take it and up the dosage. You have a new plateau. So thus you have, you become an addict of some sort. Right, this prompts the user to crave the drug to continue use despite adverse consequences and the struggle when attempting to draw from it. Right? You've created a habit in some way. Maybe it's even become routine. Think of nicotine, right? Think of me with my coffee. You say, now in my mind I've made associations, right? In my mind I say, morning routine also requires coffee. It doesn't also require putting on your shoes, your blazer, your shirt, taking a shower, brushing your teeth. Coffee is also a part of that, right? It's also becoming automated, becoming an automated process. It's becoming subconscious in a way, where you no longer requires all that mental effort. Now, what will require mental effort is for me to stop doing that, right? We say, hey, if you make the unnatural automated, the automated becomes natural, right? So something that was unfamiliar to you that you could do with or without, it doesn't matter. Now you can only do with, and now you've made it natural. Right? You've made it require very little energy, mental energy, or effort to do it. Become part of what the routine is. Right? And it becomes stronger as we'll learn about conditioning and learning. We'll see why, hey, these associations within our mind creates these impulses for us to want to do certain things. Right? The same happens with how we learn anything in life. Right? Your association with school may cause you to dress like a student. You say, hey, what do you mean dress like a student? We could correlate student dressing like a student in the university, but yeah, there's an association in your mind that you're probably not even thinking about to make you look like a student. Right? Hey, you look like a student. Hey, Professor Ross, you look like a professor. Interesting. You dress like one? What am I thinking about there? Is it unconscious behavior? All right, and the user wants the drug more than they like the drug. Oh, there's a disassociation here, right? There's a disconnect. Like you want the drug more than you actually like the drug. You may not like the way that you have to give yourself the drug. You say, oh, you gotta shoot it up in your arm, shoot it up in your butt. Like, I hate that. At least I can see love in your arms. Right? But that won't stop the desire to do we'd be like, man, alcohol tastes like crap, ugh. But the effect of it is what I'm after. So I will be able to skip being concerned about the journey because the mission is more powerful, right? Think of even some of our over-the-counter sort of drugs we take, right? We can think of stuff we take for colds and things like that. Usually doesn't taste good, but the effect of it is what we're after. So we're willing to do what we need to do in order to get the effect. All right, behavior addiction. Psychologists try to avoid using addiction to label-driven excessive behavior such as eating, work, sex, accumulation of wealth. Why would we try to avoid using addiction as a label? Right? What do you think? Yes.
These behaviors aren't changing your brain chemistry.
Behaviors are changing.
They're not, they're not like permanently affecting your brain chemistry like other drugs and medicines can.
Okay, so we say, hey, maybe things like eating, work, sex, and accumulation of wealth are not affecting brain chemistry in some way, right? Maybe, right? Possibly. Maybe too much sex, right? Too much of anything can alter perception. But part of it is also that we don't want to create a negative impression about the thing because it doesn't help, right? It doesn't help one get over or withdraw from the thing itself. Right? Guilt doesn't necessarily make people alter their behavior. So we say, hey, usually what alters behavior is some positive sort of impressions about the thing, right? And how to get over it. What'll be some positive outcomes by getting over something, not just shaming and guilting somebody with labels. Labels do usually make people worse, right? Because what happens is you take on the identity of the label, right? Naturally. So someone was like, hey, you're an addict. Typically you will behave more even like an addict. You might even dress like an addict. You may look like an addict. Because this is in your mind associated to what addicts do. Right? So our minds are very, very powerful in how we associate these things. So labels are powerful. Right? People tend to act based on labels. It's not a coincidence by any means. So think of your own race. You say, do you act the label of your race? Do you act the label of your sex and gender? Right? Do you act the label of any social identity that you're labeled, of how you should be, what you should be, what you should eat, how you talk, how you walk, and think about how powerful it is. And the case is, most people do. Right? Most people take on the form of the label itself. Because we've already associated what that label is and we conform mentally to what it is. What's the correct time right now?
45.
45, okay. 3 major categories of psychoactive drugs, right? Depressants. We say depressants is slowing down that neural activity within the brain. Then those neurons are slowing it down. You say depressants is good if you have anxiety. You say, I have anxiety, I need to come down, because anxiety is too much stimulation. Neurotic thoughts, right? Overwhelming of sensations in some sense. Say, well, how do you counteract that? You bring yourself down. And so maybe you take some drugs, right? And I say, how do you counteract it when you bring yourself down too much? Now you say, I'm depressed. Like, whoa, you're depressed. What do you mean? It's low activity. Well, you're not motivated to do anything? Like, no, I don't have the brain activity. I don't have the brain power to be motivated to get up out of the bed, right? To go work out, right? To go to school to learn, to get a job, right? You have low activity in the brain. They're like, well, I feel great because I'm not required to do anything. I definitely don't have anxiety. Like, that might be wonderful to some people who's out there doing too much. Like, yeah, I got a lot going on. I have a ton of stress and anxiety. Right? So we say, hey, there's still this teeter-tottering, up and down. Where do you want to be? The best place to be is in balance. Always, right? Then we got stimulus, right? So we say we're down. How do we bring ourselves up? Right? I wake up in the morning and I'm like, brain kind of foggy, tired. It's 6 a.m., groggy. Drink the coffee, right? The caffeine boosts those neurotransmitters, right? Boost that activity in the brain. You're like, oh wow, okay, cool. I feel great, right? It affects on the body. Remember we said when you boost that activity too high, automatically the body responds and say increase heart rate, increase breathing, right? Shoot off more blood sugar into the bloodstream for energy. So now when I drink my coffee, like, whoa, you're energetic too. Yeah, like not just my mind, my body, right? I can walk fast, talk fast, my heart's beating. Like, oh, you just drank some coffee, right? Right? You stimulated the automatic processes. That parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system kicks in and does all that stuff. Right? And then when that wears off, I may have a drop in blood sugar. Now you have a sugar crash. Maybe if I put too much sugar in my coffee or cream sugar. Right? So think about that as well too. If you go drink a soda, Coca-Cola, and like, oh dude, I got a ton of energy now. I can focus, I do while I'm studying, while I'm reading, and then 2 hours later, you crash and you're like, why am I so sleepy after my Coca-Cola? Blood sugar has crashed because you jacked it up too quick, too much. It's irregular, abnormal, right? So to say that amount of sugar and that thing you just drank will cause an irregular increase spike in blood sugar. You do that enough many times, and now you become diabetic. You won't be able to regulate blood sugar levels, and now you have a whole host of issues. And hallucinogens, right? So we say hallucinogens are basically taking distortion from reality to what's actually what you're perceiving in your brain, right? So hallucinogens really work on the senses. It usually distorts the receptors in any sensation, hearing, vision, all sorts of things, right? Taste as well too. So hallucinogens sort of distort or block some of those transmitters that are critical for perceiving, right? Perception in some way, and we're experiencing something different than what's actually out there. All right, all do their work. I'm not sure what they're saying here. At the brain synapses, stimulate, inhibit, or mimic activity of the brain's own chemical messengers, the neurotransmitters. So essentially, that's what drugs do, right? The drugs work because we already have them. We already have the chemical compound in the brain, right? If we didn't have them, they would probably be toxic and want to kill us. That stuff that would like go so foreign to your body, right? Foreign to the body. The body just naturally produces them. But usually the drugs we have them, all we're doing is just increasing or decreasing the levels in those chemicals, right? No, we can say we have an imbalance. All right, everyone, take care. I'll see you on Friday. We'll wrap this up and do a exam review. Remember, no class on Monday for our first exam. We'll talk about that more on Friday.